Wyoming Territory, 1871. A time when dreams and nightmares collided on the frontier, when the promise of new beginnings could vanish in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by unspeakable tragedy. For the Carson family, the Wyoming wilderness represented opportunity, a chance to claim land under the Homestead Act and build a life away from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. 8-year-old Elijah Carson had spent nearly 3 months watching the landscape transform from lush eastern woodlands to vast open prairies, and finally to the rugged foothills of the Wind River Range. The Blackwell wagon train. 23 settlers with hopes as vast as the territory they crossed had welcomed the Carsons despite their late addition to the party. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air carried the crisp scent of pine as Elijah collected, unkindling along the edge of their camp. Dawn had barely broken, the sky transitioning from darkness to a pale lavender that promised another clear day. The wagons stood in their usual protective circle, a futile fortress against the wilderness. Beyond, most travelers still slept, except for old Mr. Blackwell himself, who had taken the final watch of the night. Elijah's small hands moved methodically, gathering sticks for the breakfast fire, his mind wandering to the wooden horse his father had carved for his sister's upcoming birthday. Emma will be 6 next week. His mother had promised a special breakfast with the last of their preserved cherries to mark the occasion. That small joy seemed enormous after months of hardship on the trail. The first rifle shot shattered the dawn silence. Elijah instinctively dropped to the ground, the kindling scattering from his arms. More shots followed, then screams, high, terrified wails that sent chills through his small body. Through the tall grass, he could see men on horseback charging into the circle of wagons, at least a dozen riders with faces wrapped in bandanas, firing indiscriminately into the camp. Mr. Blackwell's warning cry was cut short by a bullet. The old guide collapsed near the main campfire, his rifle unfired beside him. The Hendricks family scrambled from their wagon, Mr. Hendricks pushing his wife and 3 children toward a small creek behind them. A rider spotted them, wheeled his horse around, and cut them down before they made it 20 paces. Their bodies crumpled in a terrible heap, nightclothes stained crimson in the strengthening dawn light. Elijah pressed himself flat against the earth, one hand covering his mouth to stifle his sobs. He was 30 yards from the nearest wagon, concealed in the high grass that bordered their campsite. The massacre unfolded with horrific clarity. Mrs. Peterson dragged screaming from her wagon. The Miller boys gunned down as they tried to reach their father's rifle, an infant wailing until its cries were suddenly, sickeningly silenced. The raiders moved methodically, killing first, then looting. They took only what was valuable and easily transported: money, jewelry, weapons. They didn't bother with food, stores, or personal effects. This wasn't desperation, it was calculated predation. "Check the perimeter," a deep voice commanded. "Make sure we got them all." Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. He inched backward through the grass, moving with painful slowness away from camp. The morning dew soaked through his clothes, the earth's chill seeping into his bones. 20 yards, 40. The sounds of destruction continued behind him. When he judged himself far enough away, Elijah risked rising to a crouch. The grass stood taller than his bent form, providing cover as he navigated toward a stand of cottonwoods that lined the creek. Each step was agony, his small body shaking so violently he feared the trembling might give away his position. A horse whinnied uncomfortably close. Elijah froze. "Nothing over here, Hawkins," a voice called, no more than 10 yards from where he stood immobilized with terror. "Get back here, then. We're burning the wagons." Elijah remained motionless until the hoofbeats receded, then continued his painstaking retreat toward the trees. By the time he reached the cottonwoods, black smoke billowed into the morning sky. The raiders had set fire to the wagons, erasing evidence of their specific crimes, though not the broader atrocity. From the relative safety of the trees, Elijah watched as the murderers mounted up and rode northwest, their saddlebags heavy with stolen valuables. Only when they disappeared over a distant ridge did he allow himself to collapse against a tree trunk, his small body convulsing with silent sobs. Hours passed before he found the courage to return to what remained of the camp. The wagons still smoldered, reduced to blackened frames and ash. Bodies lay where they had fallen, their vacant eyes staring skyward. Elijah moved among them like a ghost, searching desperately for his family. He found his father first, fallen near their wagon, with his hunting rifle still clutched in his hands. He had managed to fire at least once based on the spent cartridge. His mother lay nearby, her body curved protectively around Emma, his little sister's rag doll still clutched in her tiny hand. Their stillness told Elijah everything his 8-year-old mind didn't want to accept. In a haze of shock, he gathered what supplies he could salvage. A canteen half full of water, his father's hunting knife, a signed blanket, and a small tin of matches from the chuck wagon. He couldn't bring himself to take anything else from the dead. The vastness of his predicament settled over him as he stood amid the devastation. He was alone, a child in hostile territory, at least 80 miles. From the nearest settlement, winter came early to these mountains. If the elements didn't kill him, starvation would. Or perhaps the raiders would return to ensure no witnesses remained. Yet beneath the crushing weight of circumstance, something hardened in young Elijah Carson. His father's last words to him the previous night echoed in his mind. "Remember, son, Carson never gives up. We face our troubles and push through." With the meager supplies bundled into the blanket, Elijah studied his surroundings. The Blackwell train had been following the Wind River northward, planning to connect with a larger trail that would take them west to their land claims. Logic dictated he should continue north toward the outpost at Fort Bridger. He took a final look at the charred remains of the camp, silently promising his family that he would survive to tell of what happened here. Then, with the sun high overhead, Elijah turned his face northward and began to walk. The first day passed in a fog of shock and physical strain. Elijah forced himself to move at a steady pace, rationing sips from the canteen, gathering service berries where he found them growing alongside the trail. As dusk approached, he sought shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, wrapping himself in the salvaged blanket against the mountain night's chill. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of the morning's horror and the very real. Sounds of wildlife moving in the darkness beyond his shallow cave. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries echoing off the mountainsides. Dawn brought no comfort, only the stark reality of another day of survival. Elijah's feet, encased in sturdy but worn boots, developed painful blisters that burst and reformed with each mile. His small backpack made from the blanket grew heavier. As the day progressed, though it contained almost nothing, the meager rations he had salvaged would last perhaps another day if carefully measured. Yet he pressed on, following the river's course, counting each step as a small victory against death. By the third day, Elijah's situation had grown dire. The canteen held only a few precious swallows, though the river provided abundant water. When it could safely reach its banks, food was the greater concern. He had finished the last of his salvaged supplies that morning and had found little to forage along the day's journey. Hunger gnawed at his insides, making his steps unsteady and his thoughts increasingly muddled. The weather, too, had turned against him. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains, bringing an unseasonable cold front down from the north. The first raindrops hit as Elijah struggled up a rock-strewn incline. Within minutes, the drizzle became a downpour. His clothes, already tattered from days of wilderness travel, offered little protection against the deluge. The blanket wrapped around his shoulders grew sodden and heavy. His hair hung in dripping, tendrils around his face, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. "Keep moving," he commanded himself. "Just keep moving." But toward what? The question haunted him with increasing urgency. Fort Bridger remained days away, perhaps a week at his current pace. In his weakened state, with dwindling resources and worsening weather, the odds of reaching it diminished with each passing hour. As afternoon faded toward evening, the rain finally relented, though the skies remained threatening. Elijah found himself on a high plateau overlooking a sweeping valley. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, a thin column of smoke rose against the grey backdrop of clouds. His heart leaped at the sign of human presence, then immediately constricted with fear. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. But what people? Settlers, military, or perhaps the very raiders who had destroyed the Blackwell train. Elijah sank to a boulder, weighing his options. Approaching strangers carried obvious risks, especially after what he had witnessed, yet continuing alone, weakened by hunger and exposure, offered only the certainty of eventual failure. As he deliberated, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Elijah gripped the rock beneath him, waiting for it to pass. When it didn't, when in fact it intensified, a new fear took hold. His vision began to blur at the edges, and the distant smoke seemed to waver and dance. When the dizziness subsided slightly, Elijah raised his head and stared at the distant smoke. The decision had been made for him. He needed help, whatever the risk. Gathering his remaining strength, he began the descent toward the valley floor, each step measured and careful on the rain-slicked terrain. The distant smoke became his beacon, his only hope in a wilderness that had already taken so much from him. He had covered perhaps half the distance when his legs finally gave way beneath him. Elijah collapsed beside a fallen log, his strength completely spent. The thin blanket offered meager protection against the night air, which carried the bite of approaching frost. He curled into himself, shivering uncontrollably, his mind clouding with the combined effects of exhaustion, hunger, and fear. "This is how it ends," he thought with surprising clarity. "After everything, this is how I die." Elijah closed his eyes, allowing exhaustion to pull him toward unconsciousness. As darkness claimed him, he thought he detected movement in the trees nearby, a shadow separating from deeper shadows, then a crack of a twig, the soft exhale of breath, not his own. His eyes flew open, hand fumbling for the small knife at his waist, but weakness betrayed him, and the blade slipped from nerveless fingers. Elijah's vision tunneled, the world contracting to a single point before expanding into complete darkness. His last conscious thought was not of fear, but of a strange certainty. He was no longer alone in the wilderness. What Elijah couldn't know, as consciousness fled, was that the eyes watching from the darkness belonged to someone who would forever alter the course of his life. Someone neither friend nor foe, but something altogether different. Someone whose own path had led to this precise moment of intersection with his desperate journey. The figure moved forward silently, kneeling beside Elijah's crumpled form. A weathered hand, strong and sure, reached out to check for signs of life. "Heama wihio," a voice murmured in the Cheyenne tongue. "The Great Spirit has brought us together, little one. Now we must see what he intends." Consciousness returned to Elijah in fragments. The scent of sage and wood smoke, warmth against his chilled skin, the soft crackling of a small fire. For a moment, he thought himself back in Philadelphia, in his bedroom during a winter illness, his mother tending the hearth. Reality reasserted itself when he tried to move. Pain radiated through his small body, centered most intensely in his empty stomach. With a gasp, Elijah's eyes snapped open. He lay on a bed of fragrant pine boughs, beneath a small lean-to of branches and hides. Beyond the shelter's opening, stars punctured the night sky with startling clarity. The fire that had warmed him cast dancing shadows across his surroundings and across the face of the man who knelt beside him. He was tall, even in his crouched position, with broad shoulders and the distinctive copper skin of the native peoples. His black hair, streaked with a single band of grey, was braided with small objects woven into the strands, feathers, beads, what looked like tiny bones. He wore a mixture of traditional clothing and items clearly obtained from white traders. Buckskin leggings, a wool shirt adorned with intricate beadwork, and a necklace of bear claws that caught the firelight as he moved. But it was his eyes that captured Elijah's attention, dark, deeply set beneath a strong brow, regarding him with a mixture of clinical assessment and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Elijah tried to retreat, to put distance between himself and this stranger, but his body refused to cooperate. Fear closed his throat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Be still, little warrior," the man said, his English accented but clear. "You are safe now." Elijah stared at the man, his young mind struggling to process this new development. The stranger reached for something beside the fire, a wooden bowl filled with a thin broth. The rich aroma made Elijah's empty stomach clench painfully. "Drink," the man instructed, helping Elijah sit up. Slowly, small sips. Elijah accepted the bowl with trembling hands. The broth was gamey but flavorful, with unfamiliar herbs that left a pleasant warmth in his throat. He forced himself to sip carefully, though his instincts screamed to gulp it down. Who are you?" Elijah finally managed, his voice raspy from disuse. "I am called Two Hawks," the man replied, watching the boy carefully. "My people are Chitsistas." "Cheyenne." Elijah tensed at this revelation. The stories he'd heard from other settlers along the journey had painted natives as bloodthirsty savages. Yet this man had clearly saved him, tended to him when he could have easily left him to die, or worse. "The raiders," Elijah began, memories flooding back with terrible clarity. "Not my people," Two Hawks interrupted firmly. "Men who wear false faces. They attack white settlers, wear feathers and paint to blame Cheyenne and Arapaho." Two Hawks added more wood to the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "These men attacked my village 3 moons ago. Kill many. Take—" his voice faltered momentarily. "Take my wife, my son." The simple statement carried such profound grief that Elijah felt it like a physical presence between them. He recognized the expression on Two Hawks' face. It mirrored what he'd seen in his own reflection when he'd stopped to drink from a still pool the day after the massacre. "I'm Elijah," he offered quietly. "Elijah Carson." Two Hawks nodded once, acknowledging the exchange. "You are strong, Elijah Carson. Many grown men would not survive 3 days alone in these mountains." "My dad taught me some things," Elijah replied, surprising himself with the pride that crept into his voice. "Before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Your father's knowledge lives in you," Two Hawks said simply. "This is good medicine." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Elijah finished the broth, feeling strength slowly returning to his limbs. Questions tumbled through his mind, but exhaustion pulled at him with inexorable force. "Sleep now," Two Hawks instructed, seeing the boy's eyelids grow heavy. "Tomorrow we must move. This place is not safe." As Elijah drifted towards sleep, wrapped in a warm buffalo hide Two Hawks had placed around his shoulders, one final question pushed through his fading consciousness. "Why did you help me?" Two Hawks was silent for so long that Elijah thought he might not answer. Finally the Cheyenne warrior spoke, his voice low and resonant in the night. 3 nights ago, vision came in the sweat lodge. The Great Spirit showed a child alone, death walking beside. Said, "Find him." He shrugged slightly. "I follow signs, broken branches, small footprints, find you half dead by a fallen tree." Elijah wanted to ask more, but sleep claimed him fully, carrying him into the first peaceful rest he'd experienced. Since witnessing his family's murder, dawn arrived with golden fingers of light stretching through the pine boughs of the shelter. Elijah awoke feeling considerably stronger, though every muscle aches from his days of desperate travel. Two hawks were already awake, crouched near the remains of the fire, mixing something in a small clay pot. "Your body needs medicine," he explained, seeing Elijah's curious gaze. "This helps strength return faster." He offered Elijah a portion of dried meat and berries for breakfast, which the boy ate gratefully, then presented him with the mixture from the pot, a paste that smelled strongly of pine and something more pungent. "For your feet," Two Hawks explained. "White man's boots are not made for long mountain walking." Elijah examined his feet, wincing at the raw blisters and cuts that covered them. Two Hawks applied the salve with surprising gentleness, then wrapped Elijah's feet in soft strips of rabbit fur before helping him into a pair of small moccasins. "These belong to my son," Two Hawks said quietly. "They will serve you better than your boots." The gift carried a weight beyond the practical. Elijah understood he was being given something precious, a memento of a lost child. He accepted the moccasins with solemn gravity. "Thank you," he said, the simple words inadequate for the deeper exchange taking place. As Two Hawks dismantled their shelter, Elijah tested his new footwear, marveling at how the soft leather conformed to his feet, nothing like the rigid boots he'd worn since Philadelphia. "Where are we going?" he asked, watching the Cheyenne warriors erase all signs of their camp with methodical efficiency. "Men who attacked your wagon train hunt witnesses," Two Hawks replied, his expression darkening. "Found tracks yesterday while gathering medicine plants. 5 men, heavily armed. They search for survivors." Fear crawled up Elijah's spine. "They know someone escaped? They count bodies. No numbers don't match." Two Hawks shouldered a small pack containing his few possessions. "We go to the Sacred Valley, where my band camps for autumn hunting. 3 days' journey east. Safe there." Elijah hesitated, uncertain. "Shouldn't I try to reach Fort Bridger, tell the soldiers what happened?" Two Hawks regarded him carefully. "Fort is 6 days north. Dangerous path. Raiders watch trails." His gaze softened slightly. "You are too young for such travel alone, and I cannot go there." The unspoken history behind that statement hung in the air between them. Elijah understood enough about the tensions between natives and the military to grasp why Two Hawks avoided army outposts. "Will your people welcome me?" The question seemed absurd, given the history between natives and settlers, but Two Hawks considered it seriously. "Some yes, some no. Chief Grey Wolf is wise, but careful with whites." His hands moved methodically, checking the small hunting bow slung across his back. "You carry the witness burden, important to both peoples." Elijah understood the implication. His testimony about the raiders disguising themselves as natives to incite conflict would be valuable to the Cheyenne as well as to white authorities. "Which would you recommend?" he asked. Two Hawks paused, studying Elijah with unexpected intensity. "Depends on what kind of truth you seek. Fort has soldiers, protection, also has men who don't listen to Indian stories or to children's words. My camp has different protection. They will listen, but cannot take action against white raiders except in defense." He handed Elijah a small bundle of provisions. "You choose a path." The responsibility of the decision weighed heavily on Elijah's young shoulders. He thought of his father's final moments, defending their wagon against attackers disguised as Indians. How many more families would die if the truth remained hidden? "I'll go with you," he said finally. "Tell your people what I saw. Maybe they can help get word to the right people at the fort." Two Hawks nodded once, a hint of approval in his dark eyes. "Good choice. Ready to walk?" They set off through the forest, Two Hawks setting a pace that challenged Elijah without overtaxing his recovering strength. The moccasins proved their worth immediately, allowing sure footing where his boots would have slipped or rubbed raw blisters. The day passed in steady travel, Two Hawks occasionally pointing out plants or signs that would have remained invisible to Elijah's untrained eye. "Elk passed here yesterday," he noted, indicating subtle depressions in a patch of soft earth. Later, he stopped abruptly, examining a broken branch. "Bear, big one. We go another way." By midday, they had covered significant ground, and Two Hawks called a brief halt beside a small stream. As they rested, Elijah found himself studying his unlikely protector with growing curiosity. "How did you become a warrior?" he asked, his young mind filled with questions about this man who had saved him. Two Hawks seemed surprised by the question, as if few whites had ever expressed interest in his life. "All Cheyenne men learn warrior ways," he began, his English flowing more freely with the personal narrative. "But I was born during winter when the snow blows like spirits dancing. Signs showed I would walk between worlds." His fingers absently touched the bear claw necklace. "Spent 10 winters learning from our medicine man, then 5 more seasons as scout for my band." He fell silent, and Elijah sensed there was more to the story, something personal that had shaped Two Hawks' path. "And your family?" he prompted gently, immediately regretting the question when pain flashed across the warrior's stoic features. "Taken," Two Hawks said simply, the single word carrying volumes of grief. 3 moons ago, raiders came at dawn. Like with your people, I was hunting, returned to find—" He didn't complete the sentence. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle gurgle of the stream. Finally, Two Hawks rose, signaling it was time to continue their journey. "Loss makes brothers of strangers," he said, offering Elijah a hand up. Now we walked together. They traveled until dusk, covering ground with the steady efficiency of those accustomed to wilderness travel. As twilight deepened, Two Hawks selected a campsite beneath a cluster of pine trees, their dense foliage providing natural concealment. "No fire tonight," he said as he worked. "Too visible." Elijah nodded, understanding the precaution, though he would miss the warmth. The mountain nights grew cold, especially at this elevation. As if reading his thoughts, Two Hawks produced a thick buffalo robe from his pack, handing it to Elijah without ceremony. "Sleep under this. Holds heat better than white man's blanket." "What about you?" Elijah asked, noting Two Hawks had no second robe. "Cheyenne warriors trained from childhood to endure cold," he said simply. "Need less protection." Elijah suspected this was at least partly bravado, but accepted the robe with gratitude. The fur was surprisingly soft against his skin, and it retained body heat with remarkable efficiency. As darkness settled fully over the mountains, Two Hawks pressed a small object into Elijah's hand, a carved stone in the shape of a buffalo, polished smooth by handling. "Protection," he said, "from my father. Strong medicine." Surprised and touched by the gesture, Elijah closed his fingers around the carving. "I can't take this. It's a family. Tonight you need stronger medicine than I." Two Hawks interrupted. "Keep close." With that, he moved to the edge of their small camp, positioning himself where he could watch the approaches. His silhouette against the starlit sky struck Elijah as both protective and somehow lonely. A man accustomed to existing in the borderlands between worlds, trusted fully by neither. Exhaustion soon overcame Elijah despite his complex circumstances. As sleep approached, he found himself pondering the strange turn his life had taken. A Philadelphia boy, now alone in the Wyoming wilderness, dependent entirely on the knowledge and protection of a Cheyenne warrior. What would his father think if he could see him now? The thought brought unexpected comfort rather than distress. Samuel Carson had always taught his son to judge men by their actions, not by what others said about them. By that measure, Two Hawks had proven his worth beyond question. Elijah drifted into slumber, the carved buffalo clutched in his palm, like a talisman against the dangers that still pursued them. Dawn broke with an amber glow that painted the mountainside in gold. Elijah woke to find Two Hawks already alert, scanning the terrain below their elevated campsite with the focused intensity of a hawk. The buffalo carving was still clutched in Elijah's palm, its smooth contours warm from his body heat. "Good sign," Two Hawks said, noticing he still held the talisman. "Buffalo spirit watched over your dreams." Elijah wasn't sure how much credence to give the spiritual interpretation, but he couldn't deny he'd slept more soundly than expected. Given their circumstances, he carefully returned the carving to Two Hawks. "Thank you for lending me your protection." Two Hawks hesitated, then pressed it back into Elijah's hand. "Keep until we reach autumn camp. Journey not finished." He offered Elijah a water skin and some pemmican before gesturing eastward. "Long walk today. I need strength." As they prepared to depart, Elijah found himself studying the valley below. The beauty of the Wyoming wilderness struck him anew. The vast, sweeping panorama of forest and prairie, mountains and streams, all painted in the rich hues of early autumn. How different it appeared in the clear light of day, with Two Hawks' steady presence beside him, than it had during his desperate solitary flight. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Your homeland." Two Hawks followed his gaze, his expression complex. His pride mingled with something darker, was larger once, stretched far beyond those mountains. He pointed to distant peaks, now smaller each season. Treaties made, treaties broken. The simple statement carried generations of loss, delivered, without self-pity but with undeniable truth. Elijah found himself without adequate response. They set off along the ridgeline, Two Hawks setting a pace that challenged Elijah without overtaxing him. The terrain was difficult, rocky outcroppings, steep inclines, patches of loose shale that threatened treacherous slides. Yet the moccasins provided sure footing, and Elijah discovered his body adapting to the demands placed upon it. The physical labor of the journey, while taxing, brought a clarity of purpose that kept darker thoughts at bay. Two Hawks moved with the easy confidence of someone navigating familiar territory, occasionally pointing out landmarks or signs that would have remained invisible to Elijah's untrained eye. "Wolfpack passed here yesterday," he noted, indicating subtle depressions in a patch of soft earth. Later, he stopped abruptly, examining a set of tracks with intense focus. His expression darkened as he motioned for Elijah to come closer. "Men on horses," he said quietly. 5 sets of tracks. Heavy. Horses, not Indian ponies. Elijah's heart rate quickened. The raiders. Two Hawks nodded grimly. "Following the river valley below, looking for signs of survivors." He studied the surrounding terrain with new urgency, then pointed to a narrow game trail that angled sharply upward through dense forest. "We climb. Higher. A path. Harder to follow." The new route proved even more challenging than their morning's travel. The trail frequently disappeared altogether, forcing them to navigate by Two Hawks' intuitive sense of the landscape. By mid-afternoon, Elijah's legs ached fiercely, and his breath came in labored gasps in the thinning air. Two Hawks called a halt beneath the shelter of a massive boulder, allowing Elijah to rest while he climbed to a vantage point to check for signs of pursuit. "They still follow," he confirmed when he returned, his expression grim. "Not our exact trail, but moving in the same direction, searching all possible paths." Elijah took a long drink from the water skin, trying to calm his rising fear. "Will we reach your camp before they find us?" Two Hawks considered the question carefully. "Tomorrow evening if we maintain a good pace, but we must be very careful. leave no signs. As they resumed their journey, two hawks became even more meticulous about concealing their passage, brushing away footprints, avoiding soft ground that might hold tracks, sometimes doubling back to lay false trails. The physical demands of the trek, combined with the constant vigilance, wore heavily on Elijah. By late afternoon, his steps had begun to falter, his young body reaching its limits. Two hawks noticed immediately. Without comment, he lifted Elijah onto his back, continuing their ascent with barely diminished speed, despite the added burden. "I can walk," Elijah protested weakly, embarrassed by his weakness. "Save strength for tomorrow." Two hawks replied simply, "Long journey still ahead." Carried on the warrior's strong back, Elijah's perspective of the wilderness changed. He noticed details previously hidden. The intricate patterns of lichen on stone, the way sunlight filtered through pine needles creating dappled shadows, the silent passage of a red-tailed hawk riding thermal currents overhead. As the day waned toward evening, two hawks found them shelter in a small cave, set high in a cliff face, accessible only by a narrow ledge that curved around the mountainside. The location offered both protection and a commanding view of the approaches below. "Good place," Two Hawks said as he helped Elijah settle into the cave. "Raiders won't find this path easily." He produced a small packet of herbs from his medicine pouch, brewing a tea over a tiny, nearly smokeless fire built far back in the cave where its light wouldn't be visible from below. "Drink," he instructed, handing Elijah the steaming brew. "Helps tired muscles recover, makes you strong for tomorrow's journey." The tea was bitter but not unpleasant. As Elijah drank, warmth spread through his limbs, easing the day's accumulated aches. Two Hawks watched him with approval, then moved to the cave entrance to scan the darkening valley below. "We are not found," he said after several minutes of intent observation. "But they camp near the river crossing we must use tomorrow. Will be a difficult passage." The gravity of their situation settled over Elijah anew. Despite Two Hawks' protection and guidance, they remained in serious danger. The raiders were persistent, methodical in their search. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, could prove fatal. "Why are they so determined to find me?" Elijah asked, voicing the question that had troubled him since learning they were being pursued. "I'm just a kid." Two Hawks turned from his vigil, his expression solemn in the cave's dim light. "You saw their faces, could identify the leader, but more important, you saw their deception. Proof they disguised themselves as Cheyenne when killing. Whites." He settled beside Elijah at the rear of the cave. Such truth is dangerous to men who profit from hatred between peoples. Night settled over the mountains, draping the landscape in shadows. From their elevated shelter, Elijah could see a distant pinpoint of light in the valley below, the campfire of the men hunting them. Two Hawks had positioned himself at the cave entrance, his stillness so complete he seemed to blend into the stone itself. "Will we reach your people's camp tomorrow?" Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Two Hawks didn't turn from his vigil. "If we move fast, cross river before raiders wake, follow hidden paths, and if they catch us?" The question had haunted Elijah since learning of their pursuit. Now, Two Hawks did turn, his expression unreadable. "In the dim light, then I fight, you run. Remember the path we discussed." Earlier, Two Hawks had carefully described landmarks Elijah should follow if they became separated. A distinctive split rock, a cluster of 3 tall pines, a meadow shaped like a buffalo horn. The route to the Cheyenne autumn camp, if Elijah had to make the final leg alone. The weight of this contingency plan settled heavily on the boy's shoulders. He knew what Two Hawks wasn't saying, that if it came to a confrontation, the warrior would likely sacrifice himself to give Elijah a chance to escape. "I don't want to leave you behind," Elijah said, his young voice tight with emotion. Two Hawks moved from the entrance, settling beside Elijah with unexpected gentleness. Life is larger than one battle, little warrior. Your truth must reach those who can use it. From his medicine pouch, Two Hawks produced a small wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird. "This belonged to my son," he said, placing it in Elijah's hand. "Made from eagle bone. Call for help if you become lost or in danger." The second gift from his fallen son carried even greater significance than the moccasins. Elijah understood. He was being entrusted with something precious, not just an object, but a father's memory, a continuation of what had been lost. "What was his name?" Elijah asked quietly. "Your son." "Running Deer," Two Hawks replied, a softness entering his voice that Elijah hadn't heard before. "8 winters like you, fast as wind, laughed often." "And your wife?" "Morning Flower." Two Hawks touched the beaded bracelet on his wrist. "Made this with her own hands when we became one." Silence fell between them, heavy with shared grief, yet somehow comforting in its mutual understanding. Two boys, two families, taken by the same evil. The connection transcended the vast differences in their backgrounds and experiences. "Sleep now," Two Hawks finally said, returning to his post. "Dawn comes early." As Elijah drifted toward sleep, wrapped in the buffalo robe with the bone whistle clutched in his hand, he found himself thinking not of the family he'd lost, but of the strange new bond being forged in the crucible of their shared tragedy, not a replacement for what was gone, but something entirely new. Something neither of them had expected to find in the wilderness. They departed their mountain shelter, before first light, moving with painful stealth down the treacherous path. Two Hawks led the way, testing each step before signaling Elijah to follow. The descent took nearly 2 hours, bringing them to the valley floor just as dawn cast its first pale glow over the eastern horizon. The river crossing lay a half-mile. Ahead, between their position and the water, stretched an open meadow, dangerous terrain offering little cover. Beyond the distant tree line, thin wisps of smoke indicated the raiders' camp was still occupied. Two Hawks surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. "They sleep still," he murmured, "but it will rise soon. We cross quickly, directly. No time for stealth here." Elijah nodded, his heart already pounding in anticipation of the dash across exposed ground. Two Hawks adjusted the small pack on Elijah's back, checked that the boy's moccasins were securely tied, then knelt to look him directly in the eyes. "Whatever happens, reach my people," he said with fierce intensity. "Tell them of Two Hawks if I fall. Tell them of the false-face raiders." Without waiting for a response, he rose and moved to the meadow's edge. "Stay close to my shadow. Run only when I run." They set off across the meadow, moving at a measured pace that balanced speed with silence. The morning dew soaked their moccasins within moments, the wet grass slapping against their legs with each step. Elijah focused on Two Hawks' back, matching his movements precisely, fighting the urge to look over his shoulder toward the raiders' camp. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the river when a shout shattered the morning silence. "There! By the river!" Two Hawks' reaction was immediate. "Run!" he commanded, breaking into a full sprint. Elijah ran as he'd never run before, his legs pumping furiously, lungs burning with effort. The river loomed closer, a broad ribbon of dark water flowing swiftly between rocky banks. Behind them came more shouts, then the distinctive crack of a rifle. They reached the riverbank as bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Without hesitation, Two Hawks scooped Elijah into his arms and plunged into the rushing water. The cold hit like a physical blow, driving the breath from Elijah's lungs. He clung desperately to Two Hawks as the warrior fought the current, powerful, arms cutting through the water with determined strokes. Another shot rang out, the bullet striking water uncomfortably close to their position. Then they were in deeper current, the river pulling them downstream as Two Hawks angled toward the far bank. By the time they dragged themselves onto the opposite shore, they had been carried nearly a quarter-mile downstream. The pursuit is momentarily thwarted by the natural barrier. Two hawks didn't waste the advantage, immediately pulling Elijah into the dense forest that bordered the river. "They will search for river crossing," he explained as they moved deeper into the woods. "Give us a small lead, must be used well." For the next hour, they maintained a punishing pace, pushing eastward through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. Elijah's soaked clothing chafed against his skin, but the exertion and warming day gradually dried the worst of the dampness. When they finally paused briefly near midday, it was beside a tumbling mountain stream feeding into a secluded glen. Two hawks checked their back trail carefully before allowing Elijah to drink and rest. "No signs of pursuit yet," he reported. "River crossing delayed them, as hoped." Elijah sank onto a fallen log, his young body trembling with exhaustion from the morning's ordeal. "How much farther to your camp?" "If we maintain good pace, reach by nightfall," Two Hawks replied, producing a small pouch of pemmican from his medicine bag. "Eat. Restore strength." As they shared the meager meal, Elijah found himself studying the Cheyenne warrior with new appreciation. The calm efficiency with which Two Hawks had handled their escape from the river crossing spoke of years of experience navigating dangerous situations. "Were you a war leader among your people?" Elijah asked. Two Hawks shook his head. "I walk between worlds, scout, sometimes trader with white settlements, not the war chief." His expression grew distant. "Learned white man's tongue from missionaries. As a boy, learned their ways to help my people understand what comes." This explained his surprisingly good English and his knowledge of settler customs. Two Hawks was that rare individual who had maintained his identity while gaining understanding of those who threatened his way of life. "You don't hate all white people," Elijah observed. "Even after what happened to your family." Two Hawks considered this carefully. "Hate is a poor guide, blinds the eyes, weakens the spirit." He gestured toward the surrounding wilderness. "Land does not hate. River does not hate. They simply are. Man must learn this wisdom." It was a perspective utterly foreign to much of what Elijah had been taught, yet it resonated with something his father had often said. "Judge each man as you find him, not by what others claim him to be." Their rest was cut short by a distant sound carrying through the forest, the baying of hounds. Two Hawks tensed immediately, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Tracker dogs," he said grimly. "They found our river crossing." Fresh fear surged through Elijah. "They have dogs? Can we outrun them?" "Not by speed alone." Two Hawks surveyed their surroundings with new urgency. "Need to break the scent trail." He led Elijah into the shallow stream, following its course upstream for several hundred yards, before veering into a rocky ravine where the hard ground would hold no tracks. At a stand of wild sage, Two Hawks broke several branches, handing them to Elijah. "Rub on clothes, skin," he instructed, demonstrating by crushing the aromatic leaves and applying them to his own buckskins. Masks human smell. The pungent sage. Oil left Elijah's skin tingling, but he applied it thoroughly, understanding their survival might depend on this simple precaution. When they resumed their journey, Two Hawks led them on a zigzagging course, frequently doubling back or creating false trails before continuing their eastward progress. The distant baying of the hounds remained audible throughout the afternoon, sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly closer. The pursuit had become a deadly game of wits, with Two Hawks employing every woodland skill at his disposal to confuse and misdirect their hunters. By late afternoon they had reached higher ground, climbing steadily toward a ridgeline that offered both challenge and opportunity. The difficult terrain slowed the pursuit, but also taxed Elijah's dwindling reserves of strength. Each step became a conscious effort of will, his legs leaden with fatigue. Two Hawks noticed the boy's struggle. Without comment, he fashioned a quick harness from leather straps in his pack, creating a support that allowed Elijah to lean against his back while still walking under his own power. It was a compromise between carrying the boy entirely and forcing him to continue unaided. Almost there, Two Hawks encouraged as they created the ridge. Look! From their elevated position, Elijah could see across a vast valley to distant foothills beyond. There, nestled against the base of a distinctive formation that indeed resembled a buffalo horn, thin columns of smoke rose against the late afternoon. "Sky, your people," Elijah breathed, renewed hope surging through him. Two Hawks nodded. "Autumn camp of many horses band, my band." He pointed to their left, where the ridge curved around the valley. "We follow a high path, slower but safer." As they began their careful descent along the ridgeline, the baying of the hounds suddenly grew louder, much louder. Two Hawks froze, signaling for absolute silence. Through a gap in the trees, they spotted movement on the slope below. 3 riders with 4 dogs on long leashes, following their trail with relentless precision. "They gain too quickly," Two Hawks whispered, his expression grim. "Dogs follow sage scent now, too clever." He studied the terrain ahead, calculation evident in his dark eyes. They had perhaps 15 minutes before the pursuit overtook them. Not enough time to reach the safety of the Cheyenne camp. "New plan," Two Hawks decided, removing his pack and extracting essential items. "I lead the dogs away, create a strong trail south." He pressed his medicine pouch into Elijah's hands. "You continue east, follow the ridge exactly as I showed. Reach camp before nightfall." Elijah clutched the pouch, panic rising in his chest. "No! We stay together!" Two Hawks placed his hands on Elijah's shoulders, his gaze fierce with determination. "Little warrior, this is not time for fear. You carry the truth more important than one life." He tapped the bone whistle hanging from Elijah's neck. "Use if in danger. My people will hear and will come." The inevitability of their separation crashed over Elijah with devastating force. Logic dictated the wisdom of Two Hawks' strategy, but his heart rebelled against leaving the man who had become his protector and guide. "I'll tell them everything," Elijah promised, fighting back tears. "About the raiders, about you, about running." Deer and morning flower, something shifted in Two Hawks' stoic expression, a brief glimpse of the profound emotion beneath his warrior's discipline. He withdrew a final item from his belongings, the carved buffalo talisman, and pressed it into Elijah's palm. "Strong medicine for the journey," he said simply. "We will meet again, Elijah Carson, in this world or the next." With that, he shouldered a lightened pack and moved swiftly down the slope, deliberately leaving clear signs of passage, heading perpendicular to their original course. Within moments, he had vanished into the forest below, the sacrifice of his decision hanging. In the still mountain air, Elijah stood frozen for several heartbeats, the buffalo carving warm in his clenched fist. Then, with a determination born of respect for Two Hawks' choice, he turned eastward and continued along the ridge, following the exact path he had been shown. The journey seemed to stretch into eternity. Each step carried Elijah farther from Two Hawks and closer to an uncertain reception among people who had every reason to mistrust anyone with white skin. The afternoon waned toward evening, shadows lengthening across the valley below as the sun dipped toward the western peaks. In the distance, Elijah heard the baying of the hounds change tone. They had picked up Two Hawks' fresh trail and were in hot pursuit. The sound gradually faded southward, confirming the success of the warriors' diversion. The knowledge was both relief and torment. As dusk approached, Elijah reached the end of the ridgeline, where it descended toward the valley floor. From this vantage, he could clearly see the Cheyenne camp, at least 30 hide teepees arranged. In a great circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in nearby meadows. The normality of the scene struck a painful contrast to his current circumstances. The final descent would take him across open ground, visible to anyone watching from the camp. Would they see him as a curious anomaly or as a threat? Would they honor Two Hawks' sacrifice by offering protection or reject the white child regardless of his story? These questions tumbled through Elijah's exhausted mind as he began the careful climb down from the ridge. The buffalo carving clutched in one hand, Two Hawks' medicine pouch secured at his waist, the eagle bone whistle hanging against his chest, physical connections to the man who had saved him, tangible reminders of the trust placed in him. Halfway down the slope, disaster struck. A loose stone shifted beneath Elijah's foot, sending him tumbling in an uncontrolled slide down the rocky incline. He fought desperately to arrest his fall, fingers clawing at vegetation, legs scrambling for purchase. On the steep terrain, when he finally came to a stop, pain radiated through his right ankle, not broken but badly twisted. The injury transformed the final leg of his journey from challenging to nearly impossible. Standing gingerly, Elijah tested his weight on the injured limb, wincing as pain shot up his leg. The Cheyenne camp lay less than a mile away across the valley floor, tantalizingly close yet separated by a distance his injured body might not be able to cross. Darkness gathered around him, the temperature dropping with the sun's disappearance behind the mountains. To remain exposed on the hillside overnight invited hypothermia and worse. Elijah took a deep breath, steadying himself against a young pine. Two Hawks had entrusted him with a mission. Pain would not prevent its completion. Using a fallen branch as a makeshift crutch, he began the painful process of hobbling toward the distant camp, each step a testament to the determination that had kept him alive since witnessing his family's murder. The open meadow seemed to stretch endlessly before him, his progress agonizingly slow. Halfway across, Elijah stumbled, the improvised crutch breaking beneath his weight. He collapsed too, the ground, exhaustion and pain overwhelming his resolve. For a moment, he simply lay there, the vast Wyoming sky darkening above him, stars beginning to emerge in the encroaching night. Then, through blurring vision, he noticed movement at the camp's edge. Riders emerging, perhaps a dozen mounted figures heading in his direction. Whether they came out of curiosity or hostility, he couldn't tell. With the last of his strength, Elijah raised himself to his knees. He remembered Two Hawks' instructions about approaching the camp. No sudden movements, hands visible, peaceful, intent clear. He forced himself to stand, despite the pain, both hands raised, open-palmed above his head, in what he hoped would be recognized as a universal gesture of peace. The riders approached at a controlled gallop, forming a wide semicircle, around him at a distance of perhaps 30 yards. Their expressions, barely visible in the fading light, registered shock and wariness at finding a white child alone on their doorstep. One rider advanced beyond the others, an older man with streaks of gray in his braided hair and an elaborate headdress of eagle feathers. His penetrating gaze swept over Elijah, noting the medicine pouch, the moccasins, the carved buffalo still clutched in one hand. "White boy, far from white places," he observed in accented but clear English. Why? This was the moment Two Hawks had prepared him for. Drawing on reserves of courage he hadn't known he possessed, Elijah met the chief's questioning gaze directly. "I seek the Cheyenne autumn camp," he replied with a steady voice despite his exhaustion. "Two Hawks were bringing me to speak with Chief Grey Wolf. Raiders attacked us. He led them away so I could reach you safely." A ripple of reaction passed through the mounted warriors at the mention of Two Hawks' name. The chief's expression sharpened with interest and concern. "You know Two Hawks?" he asked, studying Elijah with renewed intensity. Elijah nodded, wincing as he shifted weight off his injured ankle. "He saved me after raiders attacked our wagon train. Said they were the same men who killed his family 3 moons ago." The chief, exchanged rapid words in Cheyenne with the warriors around him. One rider, younger than the others, with a single eagle feather in his hair, spurred his horse forward. "I go find 2 hawks," he announced, looking to the chief for permission. Grey Wolf nodded once. "Take 4 warriors. Follow the ridge path." His attention returned to Elijah. "Raiders follow you to our camp?" 2 hawks led them south. Elijah explained, gesturing toward the distant ridgeline. "To protect me, to protect your people." Grey Wolf considered this information, his weathered face revealing little of his thoughts. Finally, he gestured to one of the riders. "Bring the boy. He carries 2 hawks' medicine. We hear his words at the council fire." A warrior dismounted, approaching Elijah cautiously. He was younger than 2 hawks, but carried himself with similar confidence. Seeing Elijah's injured ankle, he knelt to examine it briefly before looking up at the boy. "I am Black Fox," he said. 2 hawks is my blood cousin. Can you ride?" Elijah had ridden ponies at his uncle's farm outside Philadelphia, but never a full-sized horse. Still, he nodded. "I can try." With surprising gentleness, Black Fox helped Elijah onto his horse before mounting behind him. Together, they rode toward the Cheyenne camp, flanked by the remaining warriors. Elijah found himself acutely aware of the states that followed their entrance into the circle of teepees. Curious children pausing in their play, women emerging from cooking fires, elders watching with impassive faces from the entrances of their lodges. Black Fox brought his horse to a halt before the largest teepee, decorated with painted symbols and elaborate quill work. Grey Wolf had already dismounted and stood waiting as Black Fox carefully helped Elijah to the ground. The pain in his ankle had intensified during the ride, and he struggled to stand upright without support. A woman emerged from a nearby teepee, moving toward them with purposeful strides. Unlike the other women, whose curious stares held wariness or hostility, her expression was one of clinical assessment. She wore her hair in 2 long braids, decorated with small shells, and around her neck hung a medicine pouch similar to 2 hawks. "I am Swift Deer," she said, kneeling to examine Elijah's ankle. "Sister to 2 hawks, medicine woman of many horses band." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, gently probing the injured joint. Though her touch was gentle, Elijah couldn't suppress a wince of pain. "Bad sprain," she pronounced. "Not broken. Need medicine, rest." She glanced up at Grey Wolf. "He comes to my lodge." It wasn't a request, but a statement. Grey Wolf nodded once in agreement. "Council meets when 2 hawks return. Boy tells his story then." Swift Deer helped Elijah limp toward a teepee near the center of the camp. Unlike the openly hostile or suspicious glances from many of the Cheyenne, her manner was neither warm nor cold, simply matter of fact, as if treating an injured white child were no different from any other healing work. Inside her lodge, the air was fragrant with dried herbs hanging from the central poles. A small fire burned in the center pit, casting dancing shadows across the interior. Swift Deer motioned for Elijah to sit on a pile of soft furs near the fire. "Show me 2 hawks' medicine," she requested, as she gathered supplies from various pouches and baskets. Elijah carefully removed the medicine pouch from his waist, along with the carved buffalo talisman. Swift Deer examined both, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "My brother gave you strong protection," she observed. "The buffalo carving belonged to our father." "He said I needed it more than him," Elijah explained, his voice catching. He traded his safety for mine." Swift Deer's dark eyes studied him with penetrating intensity. "2 hawks see with special vision, always has. If he protected you, gave you his medicine, he had a purpose." She worked in silence for several minutes, grinding herbs with a stone mortar, adding water to create a poultice. As she wrapped Elijah's ankle with the fragrant mixture, securing it with strips of soft hide, she finally spoke again. "Why do white boys and Cheyenne warriors run together from the same enemy?" It was the question that lay beneath all others. The unlikely alliance. that had brought Elijah to their camp. He took a deep breath and began his story, starting with the Wagon train massacre, describing how he had witnessed the raiders removing native disguises after the killing was complete. "They wore feathers and paint," Elijah explained, "to make. It looked like Cheyenne had attacked us, but they were white men. I heard them talking, planning to blame Indians for what they did." Swift Deer's hands paused briefly in their work, her expression darkening. "Same as the attack on our hunting party, same as when Two Hawks lost his family." Elijah nodded. "Two Hawks said these men play both sides against each other. Attack whites disguised as Indians, attack Indians disguised as soldiers or settlers." "Why?" Swift Deer asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Two Hawks think they profit from conflict," Elijah replied. "Said as long as whites and Indians fight each other, these men can raid, steal, kill without anyone looking too closely at who's really responsible." Swift Deer finished bandaging his ankle, her movements precise despite the emotion that flickered briefly across her features. "You witnessed this. Could I identify these men?" "Yes," Elijah confirmed. "Their leader, especially. Tall man with a scar across his left cheek. Others called him Hawkins." At the name, Swift Deer's expression hardened. "Jacob Hawkins," she said with quiet intensity. "Former Army scout, now leads a band of killers. Two Hawks have hunted him since the moon of falling leaves when our village was attacked." She offered Elijah a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid. "Drink. Helps pain, brings strength." The tea was bitter, but not unpleasant. As he drank, Elijah sensed there was more to Swift Deer's story, some personal connection to the violence that had claimed her brother's family. "You lost someone too," he observed quietly. Swift Deer's stoic expression faltered momentarily. "My daughter, Sweetgrass, 7 summers. She touched a small braid of black hair attached to her medicine pouch. Hawkins' men took her life while I was gathering healing plants. Found her when I returned. The shared grief created a bridge between them, transcending differences of age, culture, and experience. In that moment, they were simply two humans who had experienced the same shattering loss at the hands of the same evil." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Voices raised in urgency, the sounds of horses arriving at speed. Swift Deer rose quickly, moving to the tipi entrance. She exchanged words with someone outside, then turned back to Elijah, her expression grave. "Riders return. Two Hawks are wounded." Elijah's heart was constricted with fear. Despite his injured ankle, he struggled to his feet, using the center pole for support. Swift Deer didn't try to stop him as he limped painfully toward the entrance. Outside, warriors had gathered around a horse being led into the camp. Across its back lay Two Hawks, his buckskin shirt dark with blood, his face ashen against his copper skin. The young warrior who had led the search party walked beside the horse, one hand steadying Two Hawks' unconscious form. "Found him 5 miles south," the warrior reported to Grey Wolf. "Fighting 3 white men, killed 2 before taking a bullet. 3rd escaped." Swift Deer pushed through the crowd, issuing rapid commands in Cheyenne. Warriors carefully lifted Two Hawks from the horse, carrying him toward her lodge. Elijah pressed himself against the teepee entrance, making way as they brought the wounded man inside. They laid Two Hawks on a bed of furs opposite where Elijah had been sitting. In the firelight, the extent of his injuries became clear. A bullet wound to his left shoulder, knife cuts across his arms and chest, his face bruised from what must have been a savage beating. Swift Deer moved with focused intensity, cutting away the bloodied shirt, examining each wound with practiced precision. She directed 2 women who had followed her inside, sending them for water, additional medicines, and clean bandages. Elijah watched helplessly, his throat tight with emotion. Two Hawks had faced the raiders alone, buying time not just for Elijah's escape, but for the Cheyenne camp to prepare for potential attack. Grey Wolf entered the lodge, his commanding presence filling the small space. He knelt briefly beside two hawks, placing a hand on the wounded man's forehead in what seemed a gesture of respect and blessing. Then he turned to Elijah. "Council must hear your words now," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "While swift deer tends two hawks." Elijah hesitated, reluctant to leave the warrior who had sacrificed so much for him. Swift Deer glanced up from her work, nodding once. "Go," she said simply. "Tell the truth. I keep him in this world." With the help of Black Fox, who had appeared at the teepee entrance, Elijah limped toward the central fire, where members of the tribal council had already gathered. 15 men of varying ages sat in a circle on buffalo robes, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Grey Wolf took his position at the head of the circle, gesturing for Elijah to sit across from him. Black Fox remained standing slightly behind Elijah, a presence that offered subtle support, though no guarantee of advocacy. The weight of the moment pressed down on Elijah's shoulders. A white child alone among people who had every reason to mistrust anyone of his race, carrying a story that might determine the future relations between two worlds in constant conflict. "Council hears your words now," Grey Wolf began formally. "Speak the truth of what you have seen. Leave nothing out." Elijah took a deep breath, centering himself as his father had taught him to do when facing something difficult. The firelight danced across the serious faces surrounding him, highlighting the significance of the moment. These were not merely curious listeners, but judges weighing the value and truth of his words. He began with the Blackwell wagon train, the 23, souls who had welcomed the Carson family, the journey that had progressed without incident until that final morning. His voice remained steady as he described the attack in detail, the methodical slaughter, his concealment in the tall grass, the clear view he'd had of the attackers as they removed native disguises once the killing was complete. They spoke English. Among themselves, he emphasized, used white men's words, white men's names. One called another Miller. Their leader was addressed as Hawkins. The council listened without interruption, their expressions revealing nothing. Only when Elijah described how he had overheard the raiders explicitly discussing their strategy of disguising themselves as Cheyenne did murmurs of anger ripple through the circle. He continued chronologically, explaining his desperate flight, the moment two hawks had found him half unconscious beside the fallen log. "Two hawks tended my wounds, shared his food and water," Elijah said, his voice softening with gratitude. "He said spirits guided him to find me, that I carried a truth important to both our peoples." He detailed their journey together, the skills two hawks had shared, and his explanation of Hawkins' strategy of inciting conflict between settlers and native tribes. When he reached the final confrontation, where two hawks had led the pursuers away to protect him, Elijah's voice threatened to break, but he forced himself to continue. "He sacrificed himself so I could bring this testimony to you," he concluded, meeting Grey Wolf's steady gaze. "He believed the truth I carry could help end the bloodshed between our peoples." A profound silence settled over the council circle as his words faded into the crackling of the fire. Grey Wolf studied Elijah's face with penetrating intensity, searching for any sign of deception or embellishment. Finally, he turned to the council members, speaking rapidly in Cheyenne. A vigorous discussion ensued, with various elders contributing perspectives and questions Elijah couldn't understand. Black Fox occasionally translated key points in whispered English. They debate whether to send warriors after remaining raiders. Old Bear wants to approach the army at Fort Bridger. Standing Elk believes it too dangerous to involve whites at all. After perhaps 20 minutes of discussion, Grey Wolf raised his hand for silence. The council members deferred immediately to his authority. "Your words carry a ring of truth," he pronounced, returning to English for Elijah's benefit. They match what we have suspected about Hawkins and his raiders. Many attacks blamed on Cheyenne warriors happened when our people were far from those places. A gnarled elder with a deeply lined face spoke up, his English halting but determined. White boy's testimony important, but who among whites will believe him? Child alone, living among Indians. He shook his head pessimistically. White authorities dismiss such witnesses. The observation struck at the heart of Elijah's dilemma. His age, circumstances, and now his association with the Cheyenne all undermined his credibility in white society. The truth he carried might never reach those with power to act upon it. There is one who might listen, Black Fox offered, the new Indian agent Williams. He meets with Grey Wolf during winter council at Fort Bridger, has shown more respect than others before him. Fort Bridger is 6 days' ride, another elder objected. By then, Hawkins will have spread his lies about the Blackwell train. Army may already prepare punishment against our people. Grey Wolf's weathered face revealed the weight of leadership, balancing the tribe's safety against the opportunity to expose a truth that might prevent future bloodshed, weighing immediate action against strategic patience. Two Hawks live, he said finally, with quiet certainty. We wait until he can speak before deciding our path. His gaze returned to Elijah. You remain in our camp until your ankle heals. Then we discuss what comes next. Though part of Elijah wanted to protest, to insist on more immediate action, he recognized the wisdom in their caution. His primary responsibility remained honoring Two Hawks' sacrifice by ensuring his testimony reached the right ears. Not just any ears. I accept your counsel, he said formally, inclining his head to Grey Wolf, and I thank you for your protection. The chief acknowledged his acceptance with a dignified nod. Swift Deer will show you our ways. You are under Cheyenne protection now. The formal dismissal transformed the atmosphere immediately. Council members dispersed to prepare for the night's watch, while women and children who had been observing from a respectful distance approached with greater openness. The decision of the council clearly carried significant weight. Elijah had been granted provisional acceptance, if not yet full belonging. Black Fox helped him back towards Swift Deer's lodge, explaining what would happen in the coming days. Camp prepares for possible attack. Warriors watch all approaches, women and children ready to move to the hidden canyon if necessary. Because of me, Elijah said, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his young shoulders. Because of Hawkins, Black Fox corrected firmly. His evil was here before you came. You bring truth, not danger. As they approached the medicine lodge, Swift Deer emerged, wiping blood from her hands with a cloth. Her expression was tired, but no longer held the grave concern Elijah had seen earlier. Two Hawks sleep, she reported. Bullet removed, spirit strong, body will heal with time. Relief washed through Elijah with such force that his injured leg nearly buckled beneath him. Black Fox steadied him with a strong hand. He asked for you, Swift Deer added, her eyes meeting Elijah's directly. Before the medicine sleep took him. Wanted to know if you reached camp safely. Can I see him? Elijah asked. Swift Deer nodded, holding open the teepee flap. Inside, Two Hawks lay on the fur bedding, his upper body wrapped in bandages, his breathing shallow but steady. His normally vibrant copper skin had a greyish pallor, and his face was drawn with pain even in unconsciousness. Elijah limped to his side, carefully kneeling beside the wounded warrior. In the dancing firelight, Two Hawks looked simultaneously, stronger and more vulnerable than Elijah had ever seen him. The invincible guide, now revealed as merely human, yet somehow more heroic for that very mortality. I kept my promise, Elijah whispered, unsure if Two Hawks could hear him. I told them everything, about the raiders, about their disguises, about what you taught me. He placed the carved buffalo talisman beside Two Hawks' hand. Your medicine protected me. Now it needs to help you heal. As if in response, Two Hawk's fingers twitched slightly, curling around the carved stone. His eyes remained closed, but some of the tension seemed to ease from his features. Swift Deer placed a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder. He hears in spirit, if not with ears. Good medicine. She guided Elijah to the opposite side of the fire, where she had prepared a sleeping place, soft furs with a woven blanket for warmth. Rest now. Healing is needed for both of you. As Elijah settled onto the makeshift bed, exhaustion washing over him in powerful waves, Swift Deer added more wood to the central fire. The flames cast their protective glow over both injured figures, the Cheyenne warrior and the white child, united by circumstance, tragedy, and now a shared purpose that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. Swift Deer observed them both, her expression thoughtful. "Yamawihio weaves strange patterns," she murmured in her native tongue. Two who should be enemies, now bound as brothers by shared truth. Outside, the Cheyenne camp settled into the night's rhythm. Warriors taking up defensive positions, mothers singing children to sleep, elders offering prayers to ancestors for protection and guidance. Within the medicine lodge, beneath Swift Deer's watchful eye, two unlikely allies found momentary peace in the healing darkness, each drawing strength from the other's presence as they prepared for the challenges that still lay ahead. 3 days passed in the Cheyenne camp, days of healing and watchful waiting. Swift Deer tended to both Elijah and Two Hawks with equal care, applying herbal poultices to the boy's ankle and changing the warrior's bandages with methodical precision. Under her skilled ministrations, Elijah's sprain improved rapidly, allowing him to move about the camp with only a slight limp. Two Hawks' recovery proved slower. The bullet wound had caused significant blood loss, and fever set in during the second night, his body fighting the threat of infection. Swift Deer worked tirelessly, using both traditional Cheyenne medicines and remedies she had learned from missionaries. She sang healing songs through the night, burning sacred herbs and applying cooling compresses to his feverish skin. By the dawn of the third day, Two Hawks' fever broke. He woke fully conscious. For the first time, weak but clear-eyed. Elijah had been asleep on his own bedding when Two Hawks' voice, raspy from disuse, woke him. "Little warrior," Two Hawks called softly. "You made it." Elijah scrambled to his side, relief washing over him in a powerful wave. "You're awake. Swift Deer said you would heal, but—" "My sister knows her medicines," Two Hawks interrupted, a ghost of his old smile touching his lips. "Did Grey Wolf hear your words?" "The whole council did," Elijah confirmed. "They believed me, but they're waiting for you to be stronger before deciding what to do about Hawkins." Two Hawks nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Wise. Hawkins is dangerous, more dangerous now that his plans are threatened." He studied Elijah with quiet intensity. "The camp treats you well. Swift Deer has been kind," Elijah said. "Black Fox, too. Some of the others—" He trailed off, uncertain how to describe the mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and occasional hostility he'd encountered from other members of the band. "Time changes. Arts," Two Hawks said simply. "Truth helps." Swift Deer entered the lodge, carrying fresh water and herbs for the morning's treatments. Seeing her brother awake, she spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, her typically impassive features showing rare emotion. Two Hawks responded in kind, a brief exchange that seemed both affectionate and teasing despite his weakened state. She turned to Elijah, reverting to English. "You help today. Learn medicine ways for wounded warriors." The invitation marked a significant shift in their relationship. Over the previous days, Swift Deer had allowed Elijah to observe her work, but had not invited his participation. Now she began to teach him, showing him how to identify different medicinal plants, demonstrating the proper way to prepare salves and infusions, explaining which treatments were purely physical and which carried spiritual significance as well. "Medicine works on body and spirit together," she explained, as she guided his hands in grinding a mixture of herbs. Cannot heal one without another. For Elijah, these lessons provided both practical knowledge and a welcome distraction from the lingering trauma of the wagon train massacre. The methodical work of healing created a space where the past's horrors could temporarily recede, where his hands could create rather than destroy. Throughout the day, various members of the council visited Two Hawks, speaking with him privately in their native tongue. Elijah couldn't understand the words, but the gravity of their expressions conveyed the seriousness of these conversations. Something was being planned, decisions made that would affect all their futures. By evening, Two Hawks had regained enough strength to sit up, propped against bundles of furs. Grey Wolf himself came to the lodge as darkness fell, accompanied by Black Fox and two senior council members. Swift Deer indicated that Elijah should remain, a silent acknowledgement that whatever would be discussed concerned him as well. Scouts. Bring news, Grey Wolf began without preamble. Hawkins and the remaining men joined a larger group, 20 riders now. They camped 2 days' ride south of here. Two Hawks' expressions darkened. They prepare an attack on our village, Grey Wolf nodded grimly. And more. Army patrol from Fort Bridger moves east along the river. Lieutenant Davis leads them. Davis, Two Hawks repeated, recognition clear in his voice. Young officer, new to territory, easy to mislead. Hawkins sent a rider to them yesterday, Black Fox added. We believe he tells the story of hostile Cheyenne attacking the Blackwell train. Claims we hold White captive. All eyes turned briefly. To Elijah, the implications clear. Hawkins was building a narrative that would justify both his own attack on the Cheyenne camp and potentially draw the army into the conflict as well. We must reach the army first, Two Hawks stated. Show them the truth before Hawkins' lies take root. Grey Wolf considered this. Dangerous, the army shoots first, asks questions after when it comes to Cheyenne approaching their camp. I could. Go, Elijah offered suddenly. I'm white, they'd listen to me. Swift Deer shook her head firmly. Hawkins would find you, kill you before you speak one word to bluecoats. Not alone, Two Hawks clarified, his gaze meeting Elijah's with approval. With a Cheyenne escort, show the army we protect, not capture. Lengthy discussion followed, conducted primarily in Cheyenne, with occasional translations for Elijah's benefit. Multiple strategies were considered and rejected. Too risky, too slow, too unlikely to succeed, given the deep-seated prejudices. They confronted. Finally, Grey Wolf raised his hand, ending the debate. Tomorrow at dawn, Black Fox leads a small party, takes Elijah to a high ridge overlooking a river valley. Army patrol passes there midday. My brother is too weak to travel, Swift Deer protested. I go, Two Hawks insisted, attempting to sit straighter despite his obvious pain. My vision brought Elijah to us. My responsibility is to see this through. Grey Wolf shook his head. You rest, heal. Black Fox leads this journey. The firmness in the chief's voice brooked no argument, even from Two Hawks. After the council, members departed. Swift Deer busied herself preparing evening medicines, her movements betraying her concern over the planned mission. Will the army believe me? Elijah asked quietly once they were alone. I'm just a boy. Two Hawks considered this. Lieutenant Davis is young, new to these lands, not yet hardened against all Indians like some officers. He adjusted his position, wincing slightly. But words alone may not be enough. Need proof. From beneath his bedding, Two Hawks withdrew a small object wrapped in soft hide. He unwound the covering to reveal a tarnished silver pocket watch. Took this from the raider I killed, he explained. Has a name carved inside. Joseph Miller. Elijah leaned closer, examining the watch. Indeed, the inside cover bore an inscription. To Joseph Miller, with pride, Father, 1869. Miller was one of the names I heard during the attack, Elijah confirmed. This proves raiders are real men, not spirits or rumors, Two Hawks said. Take Lieutenant Davis. Physical evidence supports your words. It was a small thing, a single watch, yet it represented something concrete in a situation otherwise. Built on competing testimonies and accusations, Elijah accepted it carefully, understanding its significance. I'll bring it back to you, he promised. Two Hawks shook his head slightly. Keep as your own, if it serves purpose. Objects are just objects. Truth is what matters. That night, as Elijah lay on his bedding, unable to sleep, his mind churning with thoughts of the next day's mission, Swift Deer approached him with a small leather pouch. Tomorrow is dangerous, she said simply. Take these. Inside the pouch, Elijah found 3 items: a small stone arrowhead on a leather cord, a bundle of dried sage tied with sinew, and a tiny clay vial sealed with beeswax. Arrowhead from my father's first hunt, Swift Deer explained. Protection for your journey. Sage cleanses spirits when burned. Oil in vial heals wounds of the body. Her typically stoic expression softened slightly. My brother sees something in you worth saving. I honor his vision. The gift held profound meaning, not merely practical items, but pieces of Swift Deer's heritage and personal history, freely given to a white child she had known for only days. It represented a trust that transcended the boundaries between their peoples. Thank you, Elijah said simply, understanding that elaborate expressions of gratitude would diminish rather than enhance the moment's significance. Swift Deer nodded once, then returned to her brother's side, adjusting his blankets with gentle hands that belied her warrior's strength. Dawn came quickly, painting the eastern sky in bands of gold and crimson. The small party assembled at the camp's edge: Black Fox, 3 young warriors named Runs Far, Tall Pine, and Night Hunter, and Elijah, mounted on a gentle pinto pony that Swift Deer had selected specifically for him. Two Hawks had insisted on being carried to the departure point, propped up on a travois despite Swift Deer's protests. His face was drawn with pain from the exertion, but his eyes remained clear and focused as he spoke briefly to each member of the party in turn. When he reached Elijah, Two Hawks clasped the boy's wrist in the warrior's grip he had taught him. During their journey together, remember all I showed you, he said, his voice low but strong. Trust your instincts. Speak your truth without fear. I will, Elijah promised, and I'll come back. Tell them what happened to our families. Two Hawks nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the boy's words. They were not just the Carsons and the family of Two Hawks anymore. They had become our families, united in both loss and purpose. Grey Wolf approached, placing his hands on Elijah's shoulders in a formal gesture of blessing. Carry truth like a sacred bundle, he instructed. Handle with care, but show to those who need to see. With these parting words, the small party set off, riding northward toward the river valley where scouts had reported the army patrol would pass. Black Fox set a brisk pace, aware that timing would be crucial to their plan. As they rode, Elijah found himself studying his companions with new appreciation. These men, barely more than boys themselves in some cases, were risking their lives not only for their own people, but for the possibility of a truth that might prevent future bloodshed on both sides. Tall Pine, the youngest at perhaps 16, Summers caught Elijah's glance and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Of the 3 warriors, he had been the most openly friendly, teaching Elijah Cheyenne words around the evening fires and explaining the meanings of various tribal symbols. Army. Men have big guns, Tall Pine observed in his limited English. Big fear of Cheyenne, too. Not all of them, Elijah replied. My father always said there are good and bad people in every group. Tall Pine considered this, then nodded slowly. Your father is a wise man. He was, Elijah agreed, the past tense still painful on his tongue. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts. The landscape gradually changed from the pine-covered foothills surrounding the Cheyenne camp to more open country, the river valley spreading before them in a panorama of autumn colors. By mid-morning, they had reached the high ridge overlooking the valley. Black Fox signaled a halt, dismounting to survey the terrain with careful scrutiny. "Good place," he declared finally. "Can see the army approaching from far. Many escape routes if needed." He pointed to a distinctive formation of rocks. "We wait." "There. Good cover. Clear view." They secured the horses in a small grove of cottonwoods and made their way to the rock formation on foot. The position was indeed well chosen. Natural stone outcroppings provided protection while allowing visibility across the entire valley floor. The main trail, following the river's course, passed directly below their position at a distance of perhaps 300 yards. "Now we wait," Black Fox said, settling into a natural hollow in the rocks. "Army comes soon if the scouts are correct." The waiting proved more difficult than the riding had been. Tension built with each passing hour, the enormity of what they attempted settling heavily on Elijah's young shoulders. So much depended on his testimony, not just justice for his family and Two Hawks' loved ones, but potentially the safety of the entire Cheyenne band. Tall Pine seemed to sense Elijah's growing anxiety. He produced a small wooden flute from his pouch, playing a soft, haunting melody that somehow both acknowledged the gravity of their situation and provided calm within it. The music stopped abruptly when Runs Far, who had been keeping watch at the highest point, made a series of quick hand signals. Black Fox moved immediately to his position, studying the southern approach with intense focus. "Riders coming," he announced. "Not the army. Buckskins and civilian clothes." A cold knot formed in Elijah's stomach. "Hawkins?" Black Fox nodded grimly. 8 men, moving fast toward the river crossing. This was an unforeseen complication. Their plan had been to intercept the army patrol alone, not to encounter Hawkins' men in the process. "The timing could not be worse. They look for the army too," Night Hunter observed. "Want to reach soldiers before we do." Black Fox made a quick decision. "Change of plan. We move to a lower position, closer to the trail. Must reach the army first, before Hawkins." They gathered their few belongings and quickly descended to a new position, a stand of boulders much closer to the trail. The new location offered less protection, but would allow them to intercept the army patrol before they could encounter Hawkins' approaching party. They had barely settled into position when Tall Pine spotted dust on the northern horizon, the unmistakable sign of mounted men approaching. "Army comes," he whispered. Through gaps in the rocks, they watched as the patrol came into view. 12 soldiers in blue uniforms, led by a young officer who could only be Lieutenant Davis. They rode in disciplined formation, rifles at the ready, clearly alert for potential threats in unfamiliar territory. Black Fox turned to Elijah, his expression intense. "Now we must be very careful. I go first, alone, hands empty and raised. You follow when I signal, not before. Warriors stay hidden unless trouble comes." It was a dangerous plan, but the only one that offered any chance of success. A lone Cheyenne might be viewed with suspicion but not immediate hostility. A group of warriors would almost certainly trigger a defensive response from nervous soldiers. "Be ready," Black Fox instructed, checking that Miller's pocket watch was secure in Elijah's pocket. "Truth moment comes now." With deliberate movements, Black Fox removed his weapons, placing his knife, bow, and the rifle he carried in a hollow beneath the rocks. He unbraided his hair, letting it fall loose around his shoulders, a signal of peaceful intent among his people. Then, with a final nod to his companions, he stepped out from the rocks and walked slowly toward the trail, hands raised high above his head. The reaction from the patrol was immediate. The soldiers reined in sharply, rifles swinging toward the unexpected figure. Orders were shouted, horses pranced nervously, dust rising around the suddenly halted column. From his hiding place, Elijah could see the young lieutenant raising a hand to steady his men, preventing what might have been an immediate volley of fire. Black Fox continued his slow approach, calling out in clear English, "Lieutenant Davis, I come in peace with an important message." The officer's surprise at hearing his name called by a Cheyenne was evident even at this distance. He signaled two soldiers to flank him as he urged his horse forward to meet Black Fox. "How do you know my name?" the lieutenant demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "What message do you bring?" "I bring the truth about the Blackwell wagon train massacre," Black Fox replied steadily, "and witness who saw everything." At this, Elijah saw his cue. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the rocks, moving slowly toward Black Fox with his own hands clearly visible. The soldiers' reaction was one of stunned disbelief. Clearly, the last thing they expected to see was a white child in the company of a Cheyenne warrior. Lieutenant Davis stared in confusion, his young face. He couldn't have been more than 25, registering a series of rapid calculations and reassessments. "Who are you, boy?" he called. Elijah stepped forward, standing beside Black Fox, with what he hoped was a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "My name is Elijah Carson," he replied, his clear voice carrying across the distance. "I'm the only survivor of the Blackwell wagon train massacre, and I've come to tell you who really killed my family." The lieutenant signaled his men to hold position as he dismounted, approaching on foot to reduce the intimidating difference in height between himself and the boy. At closer range, Elijah could see intelligence in the officer's eyes, along with caution and genuine confusion. "We received reports that Cheyenne raiders attacked your wagon train," Davis said carefully. "Yet here you stand with a Cheyenne warrior." "Because the reports are lies," Elijah stated firmly. "The attackers were white men, disguised as Cheyenne. I saw them with my own eyes, and they're coming right now to make sure you never hear the truth." As if summoned by his words, a shout came from one of the soldiers still mounted at the rear of the column. "Riders approaching from the south, Lieutenant. 8 men moving fast." Davis turned sharply, hand moving to his sidearm. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than any of them had anticipated, with Hawkins' men and the Army patrol converging on their positions simultaneously. Black Fox's expression remained calm, despite the escalating tension. "Now you must choose, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Which truth do you believe? The white child saved by Cheyenne, or men who profit from hatred between our peoples?" Lieutenant Davis studied them both for a long moment, indecision clear in his young face. Then his gaze settled on Elijah with new intensity. "Tell me everything," he said. "Quickly." Time seemed to compress as Elijah spoke, delivering the most important testimony of his young life. With extraordinary clarity, he recounted the massacre, the initial attack, his concealment in the tall grass, the clear view he'd had of the raiders removing their native disguises afterward. They talked about how the army would blame the Cheyenne, Elijah explained, words tumbling out with urgent precision. "A man called Miller laughed about it, said it worked every time." Lieutenant Davis listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to growing concern. When Elijah produced Joseph Miller's pocket watch, the lieutenant examined it carefully, opening the case to read the inscription. "This belonged to one of the attackers?" he asked. "Two Hawks took it from a raider he killed," Black Fox confirmed. "Man who wore Cheyenne feathers, but spoke white man's words." The approaching riders were now close enough to make out individual figures. At their lead rode a tall man with a distinctive scarred face, Jacob Hawkins himself, exactly as Two Hawks had described him. Davis made his decision with the swiftness required by the moment. "Sergeant Willis, form the men in the defensive. Position. No one fires without my direct order." As the soldiers moved to comply, creating a protective semicircle with their horses and bodies, Davis turned back to Black Fox. "Are your other warriors going to join us?" Black Fox's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the officer's perception. "You think I would bring a child into danger with only one protector?" he asked with the ghost of a smile. "3 more watches. From the rocks, good fighters," Davis nodded. "Call them in. Slowly, with empty hands like you did." Black Fox gave a distinctive bird call. Within moments, Tall Pine, Night Hunter, and Runsfar emerged from their hiding places, following the same careful protocol Black Fox had established. Weapons left. Behind, hands clearly visible. Hawkins' party drew rein about 50 yards from the soldiers' position, clearly surprised to find an army patrol already engaging with Cheyenne warriors. Even more unexpected would be the sight of Elijah Carson, presumably dead or still in hiding, standing among them. "Lieutenant Davis," Hawkins called, his voice carrying a forced joviality that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Glad we found you. Been tracking these Cheyenne raiders for days." Davis stepped forward, positioning himself deliberately between Hawkins' men and the Cheyenne warriors with Elijah. "Mr. Hawkins," he acknowledged with careful neutrality. "Interesting coincidence finding you here, especially since I wasn't aware my patrol's route was common knowledge." The subtle challenge wasn't lost on Hawkins. His jovial expression faltered. Momentarily before he recovered, "Been scouting all through this territory since the massacre," he explained smoothly. "Looking for survivors, tracking the hostiles." His gaze settled on Elijah with predatory intensity. "I see you've found the Carson boy. Poor child must be traumatized, confused after what he witnessed." "I'm not confused," Elijah stated firmly, stepping forward despite Black Fox's restraining hand. "I know exactly what I saw. It was you and your men who attacked our wagon train. You wore feathers and paint, but I saw you take them off afterward. I heard you laughing about blaming the Cheyenne." Hawkins' expression hardened. Boy's clearly been influenced by his captors. Stockholm Syndrome, they call it. Starts identifying with the very savages who killed his family. "I wasn't captured," Elijah countered. 2 hawks saved my life after I escaped your men. The Cheyenne have protected me, helped me bring the truth to Lieutenant Davis." Davis studied both parties with careful scrutiny, his young face showing the weight of a decision with far-reaching consequences. He turned to one of his sergeants, a weathered veteran with grey at his temples. "What do you make of this, Sergeant Reynolds?" Reynolds, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, spat thoughtfully to one side before answering. "Way I see it, Lieutenant, if the Cheyenne attacked that wagon train and took the boy captive, they're taking an almighty risk, bringing him straight to us." He eyed Black Fox and his warriors appraisingly. "And they're doing it mighty peaceful-like for supposed raiders." "Could be a trap," Davis suggested, though his tone indicated he was testing the idea rather than believing it. "With 4 warriors against 12 soldiers." Reynolds shook his head. "That ain't Cheyenne tactics, sir. Not when they're hostile." Davis nodded, reaching a decision. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm going to need you and your men to disarm while we sort this situation out." Hawkins's face darkened. "You're choosing to believe a confused child and 4 savages over." "White men? I'm choosing to investigate properly," Davis replied firmly. "Disarm, please." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Hawkins' eyes darted between the soldiers, the Cheyenne, and the exposed position his men occupied. Whatever calculation he made didn't favor immediate confrontation. "Of course, Lieutenant," he said with forced calm. "Happy to cooperate with the army." He signaled his men, who began to reluctantly remove gun belts and rifles. Davis dispatched soldiers to collect the weapons, maintaining the careful distance between the 2 groups. Just as the situation seemed to be stabilizing, one of Hawkins' men, a stocky figure with a red beard, whom Elijah recognized from the massacre, made a sudden movement, drawing a hidden pistol from his boot. "It's a trap!" he shouted, aiming not at the soldiers but directly at Elijah. What happened next unfolded with the fluid choreography of those trained for crisis. Black Fox lunged forward, pushing Elijah aside as the pistol discharged. Lieutenant Davis and Sergeant Reynolds both drew and fired almost simultaneously. The red-bearded man crumpled, his shot gone wild. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, the wrong reaction could spark a full-scale firefight. Davis raised his hand sharply, voice cutting through the tension. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" His authority, combined with the precision of the two shots, taking down only the immediate threat rather than firing indiscriminately, prevented the situation from cascading into chaos. Hawkins' remaining men froze, hands raised. Suddenly, aware of the precariousness of their position, Black Fox had shielded Elijah with his body, both now crouched low beside Lieutenant Davis's horse. Slowly, ensuring no sudden movements would trigger further reaction, he helped the boy to his feet. "You okay, little warrior?" he asked quietly. Elijah nodded, though his face had gone pale with the shock of the near miss. His gaze locked on the fallen attacker, the same man who had nearly captured him in the forest before the mountain lion's intervention, now lying motionless in the dust. Davis strode forward, his young face hardened with newfound authority. "Sergeant Willis, disarm and secure these men thoroughly this time." Turning to Hawkins, whose composed facade had crumbled with the failed attack, Davis's voice carried the full weight of his commission. "Jacob Hawkins, I'm placing you and your men under military arrest, pending investigation of your involvement in the Blackwell Wagon train massacre and the attempted murder of Elijah Carson." As the soldiers moved to secure Hawkins and his men, Davis returned to where Black Fox stood protectively beside Elijah. "Are you hurt?" he asked the boy. "No, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Black Fox moved fast. Davis nodded respectfully to the Cheyenne warrior. "Quick reflexes." "Thank you." The acknowledgement, a white officer thanking a Cheyenne warrior, marked a subtle but significant shift that wasn't lost on anyone present. Davis turned to address his patrol. "Sergeant Reynolds, detail 4 men to escort our prisoners back to Fort Bridger. The rest of us will proceed to the Cheyenne camp as planned." This announcement drew surprised looks from both his men and the Cheyenne warriors. "Sir," Sergeant Willis questioned, "we have testimony and evidence suggesting these men committed murder while impersonating Cheyenne warriors," Davis explained. "Proper procedure demands we investigate fully, including interviewing the Cheyenne leader who rescued the witness." He looked to Black Fox. "Will Chief Grey Wolf receive an army delegation peacefully?" Black Fox considered the question seriously. "If you come with respect and open ears, yes. If weapons remain holstered and you bring only a small group." "Agreed," Davis replied. 6 men only, including myself. Sidearms only, no rifles." As the soldiers reorganized themselves for their new missions, Elijah found himself standing beside Lieutenant Davis, watching Hawkins being bound and mounted on his horse for the journey to Fort Bridger. "Will they be punished for what they did?" Elijah asked quietly. Davis placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Justice isn't always simple or swift in these territories," he admitted. "But with your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, they'll face a military tribunal at minimum. And the Cheyenne, will they be blamed for more attacks they didn't commit?" The lieutenant's expression sobered. "That's a deeper problem, one that won't be solved in a day." He studied Elijah with newfound respect. "But bearing witness as you've done, that's how change begins." The journey back to the Cheyenne camp took on a surreal quality. Army soldiers and Cheyenne warriors riding side by side, the boy who connected their worlds traveling between them. Conversation was minimal, but notably free of hostility. Each group observing the other with cautious curiosity rather than entrenched antagonism. Tall Pine rode beside Elijah for much of the journey, occasionally translating exchanges between the warriors or explaining landmarks they passed. The young Cheyenne seemed fascinated by Lieutenant Davis, studying the officer's equipment and uniform with poorly disguised interest. "He is young for chief," Tall Pine observed quietly. "Lieutenant," not chief, Elijah corrected gently. But yes, he seems young for his rank. He listens before shooting, Tall Pine continued, rare quality in blue coats. The observation struck Elijah as profound in its simplicity, the bare minimum of what understanding required, yet so often absent in the interactions between their peoples. As they approached the Cheyenne camp late that afternoon, scouts had already spread word of their coming. The entire band had assembled at the perimeter, warriors positioned protectively before women and children, Grey Wolf and the council elders standing prominently at the center. 2 hawks were there as well, supported between Swift Deer and another warrior, his face pale but determined. Seeing him standing, however unsteadily, sent a surge of relief through Elijah. Black Fox raised his hand in a gesture of peace as they approached, calling out in Cheyenne to explain the situation. Grey Wolf listened impassively, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts as his gaze moved from the warriors to Lieutenant Davis and his soldiers. When Black Fox finished his report, Grey Wolf stepped forward, bearing regal despite his advanced age. "Lieutenant Davis," he greeted in heavily accented but clear English, "you come to Cheyenne camp with open ears and holstered weapons. This is a good beginning." Davis dismounted, signaling his men to remain on their horses as he approached alone, a gesture of both respect and trust. "Chief Grey Wolf," he acknowledged with a formal nod, "I come seeking truth about attacks on both your people and mine." Grey Wolf studied the young officer with penetrating intensity before nodding once, decisively. "Truth requires time and words. Come to council fire when the sun touches mountain peak. Bring 2 men only." He gestured toward Elijah. "Young truth-bearers come too." With the formal invitation delivered, Grey Wolf turned and walked back toward the center of the camp, the council elders following in his wake. The implicit message was clear. The army officers would be received, but on Cheyenne terms and in timing. Swift Deer approached as the warriors dispersed, her normally stoic expression warmed by evident relief at seeing Elijah unharmed. "You return safe," she observed, quickly examining him for injuries. 2 hawks said you would. We encountered Hawkins," Elijah explained. "There was trouble, but Lieutenant Davis believed us." He glanced toward where the young officer was establishing a small camp for his men at a respectful distance from the Cheyenne teepees. "He's different from what I expected." Swift Deer followed his gaze. "Some men see with eyes open, some with eyes closed." She turned to Black Fox, speaking rapidly in Cheyenne before returning her attention to Elijah. "Come, 2 hawks wait to hear your story." 2 hawks had been returned to Swift Deer's lodge, propped up on furs near the central fire. Despite his pallor and the evident pain each movement cost him, his eyes were clear and alert as Elijah entered. He extended his hand in the warrior's greeting they had shared at parting. "Little warrior returns victorious," he said, his voice stronger than Elijah had expected. "We were lucky," Elijah replied, clasping his wrist. "Lieutenant Davis was willing to listen, and Black Fox moved fast when one of Hawkins' men tried to shoot me." 2 Hawks' expression darkened momentarily at this revelation, but he nodded with approval. "Not luck. Preparation meeting opportunity. You carried the truth well." As Swift Deer prepared medicines and Black Fox reported the day's events in greater detail, Elijah found himself studying 2 hawks with new understanding. This man who had lost everything, family, home, his place in a world increasingly hostile to his people's very existence, had somehow maintained not only his will to live, but his fundamental belief in the possibility of justice. "Why did you save me?" Elijah asked suddenly, the question that had lingered since their first encounter finally finding a voice. "After everything white settlers have done to your people, why risk yourself for one child?" 2 hawks considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Many answers," he said finally. "Vision showed me your path crossed mine. Spirits guided. Simple answer too. Saw a child in need. What kind of man would I be to turn away?" The profound simplicity of this philosophy struck Elijah deeply. In a world increasingly divided by hatred and suspicion, Two Hawks had chosen to see him not as white or enemy or other, but simply as a child who needed help. As dusk approached, Swift Deer helped Elijah prepare for the council meeting. She provided clean buckskins to replace his trail-worn clothing and explained the protocols he should observe when the formal discussions began. "Speak only the truth," she instructed. "No more, no less than what you saw with your eyes, heard with your ears." "Will it make a difference?" Elijah asked, the enormity of the divisions between the worlds he now straddled, weighing heavily on his young shoulders. Swift Deer paused in her preparations, regarding him with unexpected gentleness. "One truth alone, like one stone in a river, changes little. Many truths together change the course of water." When the sun touched the mountain peaks with golden fire, Elijah walked beside Black Fox toward the central council fire, where Grey Wolf and the elders already waited. Lieutenant Davis approached from the opposite direction, accompanied by Sergeant Reynolds and another soldier who carried a leather portfolio and writing implements, clearly designated to record the proceedings. Two Hawks had insisted on attending despite Swift Deer's protests, supported between two younger warriors who helped him settle onto a buffalo robe slightly apart from the main council circle. Grey Wolf opened the proceedings with a formal pipe ceremony, the rituals conducted with deliberate dignity that even the army officers seemed to recognize and respect. When the traditional protocols had been observed, Grey Wolf turned to Lieutenant Davis. "Now we speak of things that matter to both our peoples," he said simply. "Truth that has been hidden beneath false paint and feathers." For the next 2 hours, each person presented their knowledge of Hawkins and his raiders. Elijah recounted the Wagon train massacre in full detail. Two Hawks described the attack on his village and his subsequent tracking of the raiders. Black Fox and the other warriors provided evidence of previous incidents where white attackers had disguised themselves as Cheyenne. Lieutenant Davis listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never interrupting or dismissing their testimony. His clerk recorded everything, filling page after page with neat script. When all accounts had been shared, Davis addressed the council with formal gravity. "I believe the evidence is clear," he stated. "Jacob Hawkins and his men have committed murders against both settlers and Cheyenne while deliberately inciting conflict between our peoples." He turned to Grey Wolf. "I cannot promise swift justice. The territories are vast, authority is divided, and prejudice runs deep on both sides. But I give you my word that I will file complete reports with both the Army Command and the Territorial Governor. Hawkins will face a military tribunal for his crimes." Grey Wolf acknowledged this with a dignified nod. "Words on paper sometimes blow away like leaves in the wind," he observed, "but the intention behind words matters more. I see honest intention in the young lieutenant. What becomes of Elijah Carson?" Two Hawks asked, speaking for the first time since the council began. The question hung in the air, a reminder that amid the larger issues of justice and peace between peoples, there remained the very personal matter of one orphaned child's future. Davis turned to Elijah. "The Army can arrange transport to your nearest relatives once we've identified them. Do you have family elsewhere?" Elijah hesitated. During the intensity of recent events, he had given little thought to what would come after. "My father's brother lives in Oregon," he said finally. "That's where we were heading." "We can help you reach him," Davis confirmed, "though it may take some time to make arrangements." Two Hawks exchanged glances with Swift Deer before addressing the lieutenant. "Until then, the boy stays with us. Already knows our ways. Is under Cheyenne protection." Davis looked surprised. "You would keep him in your camp?" "Not keep," Two Hawks corrected firmly. "Welcome. Different words, different meanings. Grey Wolf raised his hand, silencing further discussion. "Young Eagle stays until the proper path shows itself," he declared, using the Cheyenne name that Elijah now realized had been given to him without his knowledge. "Has earned a place in our circle through courage and truth-speaking." As the council concluded and the participants dispersed into the gathering darkness, Elijah found himself standing between Lieutenant Davis and two hawks, physically positioned or at the intersection of the worlds he now inhabited. "What happens now?" he asked, the question directed at both men and neither. Davis adjusted his uniform cap thoughtfully. "Tomorrow I will return to Fort Bridger with my report. The wheels of justice will turn, though perhaps more slowly than any of us would wish." Two hawks, leaning heavily on Black Fox's supportive arm, regarded Elijah with quiet pride. "And you, little warrior, continue healing. Learn our ways while keeping memories of your own. Become a bridge between worlds." As stars emerged in a vast Wyoming sky, Elijah Carson, now also Young Eagle of the Cheyenne, contemplated the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. The tragedy that had claimed his family could never be undone, the pain never completely erased. Yet from that darkness, unexpected bonds had formed, spanning divisions that had seemed unbridgeable. Whether justice would ultimately prevail remained uncertain. The territories were changing rapidly, the old ways giving way to new realities, not always kinder or more just than what came before. But in this moment, in this place, truth had been spoken and heard across the boundaries of mistrust and hatred, and for the child who had survived unimaginable loss, found by a warrior who had suffered the same, that truth formed a foundation upon which to build whatever future awaited, not a future that erased the past, but one that honored it through remembrance and the determination that such suffering should not be repeated. As Swift Deer guided Elijah back toward the lodge where two hawks would continue his recovery, the buffalo carving passed between them. No longer a talisman of protection, but a symbol of connection, a physical embodiment of the ancient wisdom that recognized the shared humanity beneath all differences. "Two paths now lie before you," Swift Deer observed as they walked beneath the star-washed sky. "White world and Cheyenne world." "Which should I choose?" Elijah asked. Swift Deer's typically solemn features softened into a rare smile. "Perhaps the greatest medicine is not choosing one path or another, but walking both with an open heart. Become a living bridge between worlds that wish to remain apart." In the distance, the council fire burned low. Army officers and Cheyenne elders still engaged in conversation that would have seemed impossible days before. A small beginning, perhaps, but beginnings were the necessary first step on any journey toward understanding. And for the lone child survivor of the Wagon train massacre and the Cheyenne warrior who had found him, that journey, however uncertain its destination, had already transformed them both in ways neither could have imagined. When their paths first crossed in the wilderness of Wyoming territory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.